Who is the greatest physicist of all time? The first matchup is between Sir Isaac Newton and Lev Landau. Both of these are pioneers in physics. They both did tremendous work throughout their lives. They've contributed so many things. Their Wikipedia articles are just filled with things named after them. But I think at the end of the day, Sir Isaac Newton. All right, the next matchup is between James Clerk Maxwell and Richard Feynman. Now, this one's a tough one because both of them, again, one of the GOATs. But it's hard to judge because one of them was like the founder of electrodynamics. He came at the end. He put all the equations together. And then the other one was the quantum electrodynamics guy. So who should we choose here? It's very tricky. I would lean more towards Feynman just because he had more of an effect on me when I was just starting to get into physics. So probably Feynman here. All right, next up we have Madame Wu versus Jocelyn Bell Burnell. This one's going to be a tough one. Let me tell you why. Madame Wu was one of the first people to undergo the experiment which shows CP violation. On the other hand, I've actually met Jocelyn Bell Burnell, and she was fantastic to meet in person. Just a great physicist and a great person. So it's really hard for me. On the one hand, you have particle physics, Madame Wu. On the other hand, you have someone that I've actually met in real life. It's hard to choose, but I'm going to go with Madame Wu. All right, the next matchup is between Vera Rubin and Marie Curie. Now this one again, tough matchup. Vera Rubin, one of the first founders of dark matter. She did work on galaxy rotation curves. And then Marie Curie, 2 Nobel Prizes. I don't need to talk too much about her. So it's hard to choose, but I think if you won 2 Nobel Prizes, it's hard to beat, So I'm going to have to go with Marie Curie. On the other side of the bracket, we start off with Ed Witten versus Paul Dirac. Now, I don't know what I did by putting Ed Witten in here. I mean, he's just a beast on his own. But at the same time, he's up against Paul Dirac. Paul Dirac, the first person to write down the relativistic equation for fermions in quantum mechanics and discovering antimatter in his equation, so theoretical antimatter. Later on, it was actually discovered. Ed Witten, on the other hand, pioneer in string theory, in quantum field theory, and he's also won the Fields Medal, which is crazy. So he's both a mathematician and a physicist, and it's just so hard to choose between these two. But the person who's probably more related to what I do is Paul Dirac, so I'm going to choose Paul Dirac. All right, next up we have the legend of experimental physics, Michael Faraday, versus, do I need to say his name, Albert Einstein. I think this one, I'm going to be honest, I'm not going to say too much. We all know it. Next up, we have a very tough battle between Lisa Meitner, who worked on nuclear fission, versus Katherine Johnson, who did tremendous calculations for orbital trajectories back when they were sending the lunar module. Now, I'm going to be honest, this one's a tough one. Personally, I lean more towards nuclear physics because that's what I do. So I have a little bias here. I'm biased towards nuclear physics, so I'm just going to have to choose Lisa Meitner. Now, the final battle of round one is between Donna Strickland and Emmy Noether. Now, here's the thing. I've seen Donna Strickland in real life. I've seen her give her talk. Just brilliant, genuine person, very funny. On the other hand, you're dealing with Emmy Noether. I mean, perhaps a physicist's favorite, So, again, hard to choose, but I have some biases here that I will expose. Emmy Noether is probably one of my favorites of all time. So, I'm going to have to go with Emmy Noether. All right, next up we have round 2 battles. Now it's getting insane. We have Sir Isaac Newton versus Richard Feynman. This is a tough one. I know a lot of you in the comments are going to be split on this one. But personally, I think at the end of the day, if you actually compare, pound for pound, Isaac Newton has to come on top just because he has contributed a lot more to the field of physics. He invented calculus, his laws of motion, law of gravitation. He did so many different calculations. All of that, he had to just do it, the first person to ever do it. Feynman, on the other hand, yes, he was a pioneer, quantum electrodynamics. His teaching was unmatched. But, the amount of ingenuity, the amount of pioneering that Newton did, it's just out of this world. So I have to go with Sir Isaac Newton. All right, on the other side, we have Madame Wu versus Marie Curie. Again, this one's really tough. Let me tell you why. You got Madame Wu, who was never given the Nobel Prize even though she deserved it, and she discovered CP violation in cobalt. On the other hand, Marie Curie, 2 Nobel Prizes. Radioactivity. How do you deal with two Nobel? You know, I always go back to that. Two Nobel Prizes. How do you deal with that? It's tough. It's tough. But again, I will reveal my biases. I'm a particle physicist, and when it comes to particle physics, it has to be Madame Wu. Come on, who are we kidding over here? On the right side of the bracket, we have the legend Paul Dirac versus the Albert Einstein. Again, look, Paul Dirac, one of the greatest physicists of all time. Whoever you put against Einstein, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard to have a pound for pound match with Einstein. You discovered the Dirac equation, great. You had a million other discoveries when it comes to fermions and quantum mechanics and all that. But come on, general relativity, special relativity, photoelectric effect, 4 papers in 1 year, all of which probably deserved a Nobel Prize. Come on. Who are we kidding over here? Albert Einstein. Then we have a big match between Emmy Noether and Lisa Meitner. And I've already told you about my biases. I am biased towards Emmy Noether at every corner. So now we have Emmy Noether, Noether's theorem, symmetries, which give you conservation laws, versus nuclear fission. See, I'm biased towards nuclear fission. I'm a nuclear physicist at some points. But then on the other hand, the beauty of Noether's theorems just are unmatched. So if I'm being honest, I have to go Emmy Noether. It's Emmy Noether. We've reached the semifinal. We got the Sir Isaac Newton versus Madame Wu. Now let's compare the weight of discoveries. Madame Wu discovered CP violation, which in particle physics is a huge deal. But the extent to which that discovery goes, it's limited in scope, right? It only affects particle physicists. Maybe later it becomes something that completely changes our lives. But the scope is limited in terms of that discovery. Compare that with Isaac Newton, who discovered the law of gravitation, the laws of motion. We still teach Newtonian mechanics to this day. They are amazing equations that work for most cases in everyday life. So if you're going pound for pound, Sir Isaac Newton is going to come on top. The other side, we have Albert Einstein versus Emmy Noether. Now, fun fact, these two overlapped, and they overlapped when it came to general relativity. Because when Einstein was working on general relativity, he found that energy conservation was something weird. It seemed like you get energy conservation in a way that doesn't really work the same way as classical mechanics. And then Emmy Noether came in and she said, actually, it doesn't even make sense to talk about energy conservation. You can't really talk about energy being conserved whenever you have a curved background, a curved space-time. So now you have to put these two up against each other. Now the problem here is that Albert Einstein did a lot more than just general relativity. And so if you want to go pound for pound again, it has to be Albert. We have reached the final, which for many of you, I guess, was expected. I don't think people thought this would go any different way. You got Sir Isaac Newton versus Albert Einstein. Now here is where all of you will be split in the comments. I reckon 50-50 for Sir Isaac Newton versus Albert Einstein. How do we choose? This one's difficult. You got law of gravitation, laws of motion, optics, discovered calculus, invented calculus, if you may. Albert Einstein, on the other hand, photoelectric effect, Brownian motion, special relativity, general relativity, EPR, quantum mechanics. It's hard to compete. Who do I choose? I'm at crossroads over here. It's insanely hard to choose between these two. I mean, both of them have pioneered things in multiple fields. They've invented new kinds of physics, and I don't know how to choose between them. But if I'm being honest, I've always had a little bias towards Newton. I think he was the goat of physics. I think he is the goat of physics. It has to be Newton. It has to be Newton. I can't. It's the Sir. The goat of physics, Sir Isaac Newton.